Hello et bienvenue à tous dans ce 84e numéro du Rétro. Merci à tous ceux qui soutiennent la chaîne et qui permettent de continuer la grande aventure des NBA Stories. Si vous souhaitez supporter ce projet, sachez qu'il est possible d'offrir un tip directement depuis YouTube en cliquant sur le cœur sous cette vidéo. Merci à tous. La réalisation de cet épisode a été rendue possible grâce au fidèle partenaire des NBA Stories, Oli. Oli est une toute nouvelle marque de boissons énergisantes et de thé glacé. Contrairement à d'autres, Oli ne contient pas de sucre, pas de taurine, arômes et colorants. Tout est fait pour vous donner un coup de boost de façon totalement naturelle. Oli Énergie, le parfait complément pour les pratiquants de sport, conquis de plus en plus d'athlètes. La marque propose des produits abordables, mais à la superbe direction artistique. Ça nous donne presque envie de collectionner les sachets. Découvrez les produits originaux d'Oli en cliquant sur le lien en description. N'oubliez pas d'utiliser le code promo NBASTORIES pour 10% sur toute la boutique et NBASTORIES 5 pour 5 € de réduction sur votre première commande. Laissez-nous vous présenter celui qui sera votre principal narrateur, un invité de renom, Mark Turmell. Personnage emblématique de l'histoire du jeu vidéo, Turmell n'est ni plus ni moins que le créateur du mythique NBA Jam. C'est un honneur de l'avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui et nous le remercions du fond du cœur d'avoir accepté notre invitation. New York, 1983. Cette année oubliée fut pourtant celle de la croisée des chemins pour la NBA. David Stern, avocat pour le compte de la compétition, était en guerre contre Larry Fleischer. Ce dernier représentait les joueurs NBA et donnait du fil à retordre dans la Grande Ligue. Stern et son équipe voulaient à tout prix instaurer une limite salariale, le salary cap. Les joueurs ne voulaient pas en entendre parler. Une grève générale était à deux doigts d'être déclarée. Non seulement les playoffs étaient prêts de ne pas se produire, mais tout l'avenir de la ligue était désormais incertain. Pour la NBA, instaurer un salary cap était une nécessité pour sauver une compétition en perdition. Selon une enquête du Los Angeles Times, plus de la moitié des joueurs étaient toxicomanes. La présence d'un grand nombre d'athlètes noirs était mal perçue par le public blanc d'alors. Les trois quarts des franchises étaient proches de la faillite. Pour couronner le tout, la NBA souffrait d'une très faible couverture médiatique. CBS, le diffuseur d'alors, était de son propre aveu davantage intéressé par le golf que le basketball.
Back in that era, basketball was not as big, of course, as it is today. It was, just as an example, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, Lakers versus Celtics, the classic matchup, made it to the NBA Finals. When I was watching those NBA Finals games, I was on the East Coast, I was in Michigan, and those basketball games were played after the nightly news on your local station. At 11:30 p.m. at night is when you would get to watch Game 7 of Johnson versus Bird. Basketball was not the must-see live TV experience.
Le 1er avril 1983 est une date charnière dans l'histoire de la NBA. La Ligue trouva un terrain d'entente avec les joueurs pour instaurer un salary cap. Désormais, toutes les équipes étaient sur un même pied d'égalité, ce qui ne fit qu'augmenter le niveau de la compétition. Cette victoire portait le sceau de David Stern, un homme qui devint officiellement le nouveau commissionneur de la NBA en 1984. Son ancien ennemi Larry Fleischer de s'exprimer. « Je ne suis pas très enthousiaste de le voir prendre les rênes de la NBA. Je pense qu'il est un avocat pur et dur, et qu'il manque de connaissances en termes de marketing. » Contrairement au baseball et au football américain, David Stern était conscient que le basketball ne faisait pas partie du mythe national. Mais la balle orange avait un atout particulier, celui d'être davantage centré sur les joueurs que les équipes. À ce petit jeu, David Stern fut béni, car il accueillit lors de sa première draft la machine à cash Michael Jordan. Et oui, Larry Fleischer avait eu tout faux. Stern s'avéra être un génie du marketing. Voulant, selon ses propres mots, devenir le Disney du sport, la NBA envoya gratuitement des highlights de ses matchs aux chaînes de télévision pour augmenter son exposition. À travers un habile jeu de licence, les produits estampillés NBA se retrouvèrent sous tous les sapins.
Hundreds of millions are spent for a piece of it, for anything with that coveted NBA logo. $40, $90, $150, $750.
Les années 1980 virent l'émergence de NBA Entertainment. Les cassettes centrées sur les joueurs et les franchises se vendirent comme des petits pains. L'arrivée du câble permit à la NBA d'enfin connaître l'exposition qu'elle méritait à la télévision. Mais un autre média émergent faisait des appels du pied à la grande ligue, le jeu vidéo.
So all the way back to 1982, 83, there was the Dr. J versus Larry Bird EA game that was one-on-one. That was a big hit back there in the 80s on, like the early Apple computer and the early Atari computers. Then, EA, they had started to make their NBA Live basketball franchise, 5-on-5, simulation, very slow-moving, poor graphics. They had started Madden, so they were trying to do the same thing with basketball. But it didn't really resonate for me. I'm not really into all the stats and, kind of the sluggish movement. I was an arcade guy.
Midway Games était parmi les studios les plus en vogue au début des années 1990. Dans cet âge d'or de l'arcade, Midway avait proposé des titres mythiques tels que Mortal Kombat. C'est alors que Mark Turmell, développeur pour le studio et fan de basketball, va créer un jeu qui marqua tous les esprits.
On the arcade front, there was a game called Arch Rivals that was, you could kind of punch a guy in the face, you could pull his shorts down. It did some pretty good numbers. The real big thing that was happening inside Midway in that era was digitized graphics. So the company had released a game called NARC, N-A-R-C, that had digitized graphics, bad guys, and good explosions. And, it seems silly to think about now, digitized images or every image you see on a computer or your phone. But back then, everything was hand-drawn until you started to get into these couple of products. And so NARC had excited the game developers into thinking, okay, what else can we digitize? What's next? And that's when my partner on the art side for my first coin-op game, which was called Smash TV, he went off with Ed Boon to do Mortal Kombat, to record a fighter, martial arts, and I broke off to do basketball. I'm a huge basketball fan, but primarily because it was digitized graphics. We were geeking out on the ability to, take, whether it be high 8 footage or VHS footage, or record something and then strip out the background to, get that image. And then we would play that image, maybe the frame rate would be really slow. But that presented a different style, a different look for video games. So basketball was really represented both on the coin-op side and even on the home console front. Well, being an arcade game, that it's got to feel good in the coin-op space. You need to wow people to get that first 25 cents, that first token, the first quarter. So you need to have something really flashy, and it's got to feel good to get then the next quarter and the next quarter, right? And so the mindset for me in basketball was that the digitized graphics and a flashy dunk, even in like the attract mode or watching over somebody's shoulder, you would see that. And that kind of creates what we call a wow moment. Like, okay, well, that looked cool. So that was really the inroad to get the attention of players. Basketball is such a perfect sport with the basic rules. A shot clock, 2-point shots, 3-point shots. So it was really a great, just kind of base rule set for a game.
Avec ses graphismes et son gameplay innovant, le titre que concoctait Turmell avait tout pour faire du bruit. Mais avant cela, il fallait convaincre la NBA, ce qui n'était pas donné. Michelle Brown, alors directrice des licences NBA, de se rappeler. Les jeux d'arcade étaient principalement dans les bars à l'époque, et ce n'est pas l'image que nous voulions. Midway a dû nous supplier de les écouter.
It was kind of crazy. It was we put together a videotape of our work in progress. The CEO of our company, Neil Nicastro, said, "Hey, we should try to get the NBA license." And I thought, well, that would be, silly. We're not going to be able to get the license. You had Jordan that had, broken onto the scene. You had the bad boys of the Pistons. The sport really started to grow right there in that era. And so we reached out to the NBA with a video of our work in progress, generic heads on top of, generic basketball players. And, we told them, we wanted to make an arcade game, and they immediately said, no, we don't want our NBA logo inside arcades because their understanding of arcades was what they saw at Times Square in New York City because their headquarters were nearby. And back in that day and age, Times Square was pretty seedy. I mean, there was a lot of prostitution, drug use. The arcades is where a lot of, activity would be happening. It was kind of a rough spot. So they didn't want their logo there, didn't want to be associated. And that just simply compelled us to create another video that showed arcades across the country that were more family entertainment centers, bowling alleys, something that was more common than New York City's Times Square. And they actually looked at that and said, okay, we get it, maybe there's something here. And then we were able to negotiate, a deal.
Alors c'est bon, le bébé de Mark Turmell allait pouvoir porter le sceau de la NBA. Mais une bonne nouvelle en appela une bien plus mauvaise. Les joueurs d'hier ou aujourd'hui se posent la même question. Mais où diable était la tête d'affiche de la NBA dans le jeu? Vous le voyez venir, un numéro 23 du nom de Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan was in the game. We had the game on location in Chicago as I was developing it. And of course, the Chicago Bulls were the most popular team in the arcade. He was the most popular player to be picked. But right before we launched the game to our, distribution system across the country, Michael Jordan pulled out of all licensing from the NBA because he had his own special, Nike deal where he felt he could make more money than sharing equally with all of the licensing income, because all the players, just share in NBA licensing revenue on an equal basis. And so he pulled out of the licensing. That was scary for us because obviously it was Michael Jordan and it was right at the height of, the Bulls mania. And I remember going to LA, UCLA, Westwood. They had an arcade there that was one of our locations where we would test new games, to see how they're going to perform. And I walked into the arcade, NBA Jam, we set it up. And the same thing that was happening in Chicago with the Chicago Bulls was happening there in Westwood, except players were picking the Lakers. And the same excitement and hoopla around the game was happening there. And I remember calling back to Chicago, where we made the game, and saying, well, at least I know now that the game is going to be popular in 27 cities because it's going crazy here in LA, just like it's been going crazy in Chicago. So that was really validation for me that we were onto some kind of a hit game. And the fact that they couldn't pick Michael Jordan on that test game didn't matter to them. They were excited for their players on the Lakers, and I don't think it had any impact to our success, whatsoever.
It's the talk of the weekend, Midway's NBA Jam. Some of these fans have traveled thousands of miles to be here among the game's greatest.
This is bad, man. This is bad.
Unheard of collections. At all of our test locations, NBA Jam is collecting between 124 and 167% of what Mortal Kombat did during its first 6 weeks. Operators can expect to recoup their initial investment very rapidly.
Crazy, yeah, crazy. $1 billion, 1 quarter at a time. I mean, I knew once we were, in the arcade in Chicago, we had fist fights that were breaking out. We had people, dunking the ball, and the glass would shatter, and they would, run around the arcade screaming, inside and come back to their station. The coin boxes were overflowing. The money with quarters, they would get jammed up, so they had to come in and pull the money out more frequently. So we knew that we were setting records on the revenue front, but never really thought that it could make $1 billion in a year. I mean, that was, that's in the era where the #1 film was Jurassic Park that came out that same year. And, and it topped out at like $300 million or somewhere in that range for the year. And so to think that, an arcade game could, triple, really, it just didn't, it doesn't make sense. One of the more interesting stories is Gary Payton, who was a rookie the first year. I didn't put him in the game. He was a rookie. I followed his college career a little bit, but he sent in his own picture and said, "Here, can you put me in the game?" And so that kind of began a communication line with him and Jordan. Jordan eventually got his own game with himself back into it. Shaq, though, the crazy thing there was within the first month, Shaq ordered 2 games, and the first one went into his house, and the next one went onto the team plane. Back in those days, an NBA team was just getting to the point where they would have a private plane. Prior to that era, they just flew, on regular, airlines as they went city to city. And so he had the second version go on the plane, and then they would roll it into his hotel suite when they were on the road. And I eventually talked to him a year or so later, and he said that him and Chris Webber, and they both said the same thing, that they stopped going out to clubs, they stopped, partying, and they gambled. They sat there in Shaq's suite, and they just played NBA Jam. Funny to imagine these guys huddled around, playing a video game.
Avec son gameplay inimitable et sa bande-son légendaire à base de boom shakalaka, le NBA Jam de Mark Turmell est devenu le divertissement de toute une génération. À l'heure des graphismes toujours plus réalistes et des modes de jeu complexes, NBA Jam vient nous rappeler une époque où les écrans réunissaient bien plus facilement la famille et les amis. Electronic Arts a tenté un revival du jeu en 2010, mais rien n'équivaut à la version originelle de 1993. Puisque Mark Turmell lira certainement les commentaires de cette vidéo, pourquoi ne pas lui raconter à votre tour vos expériences de jeunesse sur NBA Jam?
There's something about the speed, the reaction time, those basic rules of 2-pointer, 3-pointers, shooting, teammate, alley-oops, that is just a simply good game fun, without having to, get into fouls and stats and free throws. It's just a type of format that you cannot do every single year. You can't change the stats on a player or add a couple of new dunks. But on the simulation side, like an NBA 2K, you know, they have obviously proven that, it just like Madden has, that taking the stats and the ongoing evolution of the sport and the new players coming in and older players, you know, dropping off on their skills and having ratings, even if the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't as fun or, you know, over the top, it still is, you know, super engaging, and it's a different type of a player. I get comments all the time about, hey, when are you going to bring NBA Jam back? People ask about that, you know, kind of simpler format. It's fun. People have said, hey, I was never into the sport until NBA Jam, and then I became a fan. Others will say, I can't even play NBA 2K. It just doesn't grab them, but this was fun. I think that it was the right time. It was still the height of the arcade, you know, business. You know, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, NBA Jam, all these things kind of, you know, percolating in the shops, the driving games. But there's still an audience today. The same techniques that worked for back then, 25 years ago, you know, more now, that felt good for the player, those mechanics still feel good today. And if I were to work on a basketball game today, there's no question in my mind that I could have another crack at a game that is wildly fun to play and captures that other audience that's not into the simulation market.
Boom shakalaka!